I've worked in fast food long enough to know that you can never quite predict what a shift will throw at you. Most nights blur together. Grease-stained aprons, the hum of the fryers, the same order of chicken nuggets called out 100 times. But sometimes a shift carves itself into your memory so deep that even years later you feel your chest tighten just thinking about it. This was one of those nights. It started like any other late evening shift. I was on closing duty, meaning the dining room was emptying out, trash bags were getting knotted up, and I was counting the minutes until we could shut the doors. The only reason I even noticed was because the PlayPlace stayed weirdly noisy long after it should have been winding down. Normally, by 9 p.m., the plastic tunnels and ball pit were dead silent. But that night, every so often, I'd hear the hollow thud-thud of someone sliding down or the plasticky squeal of sneakers dragging against a tunnel wall. At first, I thought nothing of it. We still had a couple of families hanging around, parents finishing their coffee while their kids burned the last of their energy. Nothing unusual. But time dragged on, and families trickled out one by one. I remember wiping down a booth and realizing with a little jolt that the mother and 2 kids who'd been parked there earlier were gone. But the noises from the PlayPlace hadn't stopped. I hesitated at the counter, rag still in my hand, straining my ears. From the direction of the play structure, I heard muffled voices. Low. Not the squeaky chatter of children, but something deeper, adult voices. My first thought was that maybe some teens had snuck in after a birthday party. It happens. But when I went to peek through the glass door into the play area, my stomach knotted. Through the dim lighting, I could just make out shapes moving in the tunnels. They were too big. Shoulders bumping against the sides, knees bent awkwardly, bodies pressing into plastic that was never meant to hold them. And the voices, they weren't talking normally. They were giggling, except it didn't sound like genuine laughter. It was high-pitched in spots, forced in others, echoing unnaturally in the plastic tubes until it twisted into something alien. I stood frozen for a moment, telling myself maybe I was wrong, maybe it was just a couple of older kids. But then one of them slid down the covered slide, and the whole tunnel groaned under his weight. When he landed at the bottom, he was definitely not a teenager. He was a grown man, maybe late 30s, clothes rumpled, shoes scuffed. He sat there for a second, wheezing from the effort, before he looked up at the glass where I stood. He grinned. It wasn't a friendly grin. It was the kind of smile that stretches too wide, the kind meant to taunt you, like he was daring you to do something about it. Behind him, in the shadow of the tunnel, another face appeared, pressed against the mesh, nose squashed, eyes glinting in the low light. That one was laughing, except the sound was all wrong, stretched thin and metallic from the plastic echo until it barely sounded human. The smell hit me then. Not fries, not cleaning supplies, smoke. Stale cigarettes, sharp and acrid, leaking from the play structure's hollow insides. Underneath it I caught something else. Cheap alcohol, sweat, grown men's scents in a space built for kids. It made my skin crawl. I forced myself to push open the PlayPlace door, though every instinct screamed not to. "Hey, you can't be in there!" I said, trying to sound authoritative, though my voice cracked. For a moment, no one responded, just the squeak of plastic as someone shifted deeper inside. Then one of them, a weirdly sing-song, called back, "Don't worry, we're just playing." That word, playing, hearing it from an adult in that tone turned my stomach.
One of them started crawling toward the opening, but because he was too big, it wasn't smooth. His elbows banged the plastic walls, his jeans scraped loud against the plastic, his movements slow and dragging, almost deliberate. The sound was unbearable, like something dragging itself closer inch by inch. I stepped backward, heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. I knew I should call the manager or the cops, but my feet felt glued to the tile. The man who had slid down the slide was still at the bottom, sitting with his legs stretched out, head tilted. He took a drag from something I couldn't see clearly, probably a cigarette, maybe worse, and exhaled a cloud of smoke that curled against the plexiglass windows. "You work here, right? Why don't you come in? Have some fun," he said, voice low and hoarse. Behind him, distorted laughter rose again, bouncing around the tunnels, overlapping until it sounded like there were more voices than bodies. That was the breaking point. I stumbled backward out of the PlayPlace, the door swinging shut behind me. My hands shook as I reached for the phone at the counter. I don't even remember if I locked the play area door before dialing. All I knew was that I couldn't stand the idea of turning back and seeing those men spilling out of the tunnels, grinning, dragging themselves across the tile. When the dispatcher answered, I could barely form sentences. My throat felt tight, like if I described what I'd seen out loud, it would sound unreal. There are adults in the play area. They're not supposed to be here. They won't leave. I hung up after giving the details, then kept my eyes fixed on the counter, refusing to look back at the glass door. The distorted laughter echoed in my head long after it stopped, replaying over and over, like the tunnels themselves had trapped the sound and refused to let it go.
My first day working at McDonald's wasn't anything like I imagined. I thought it would just be a steady rhythm of customers, fries hissing in the oil, the soft chime of the drive-through headset, maybe the occasional grumpy parent or spilled drink. Instead, the very first thing my manager said to me, after showing me where to clock in, was something I couldn't make sense of. He looked at me with this weary, matter-of-fact expression, like he'd repeated the same line 1,000 times before. "We're not babysitters. If parents leave their kids here, that's on them. We are not responsible." I actually laughed under my breath, thinking he was half joking. Yeah, I mean, of course not. Who would just leave their kids at McDonald's? He didn't laugh. His face didn't even twitch. He just kept staring at me. For a moment, then shrugged like he'd said what he needed to say, and walked off to check the fryers. That silence stuck with me. There was something about the way he said it. Not like a warning, more like he was stating a fact of life, one I'd better get used to. At the time, I brushed it off. I figured maybe there had been some incident years ago that made him say that, but it didn't make sense why he'd open with it. That was until a couple weeks later when I saw firsthand exactly what he meant. It was a Saturday, mid-afternoon, one of those shifts where the dining room was buzzing, the clatter of trays, kids shrieking in the PlayPlace, the soda machine hissing as people filled their cups. The smell of fries clung to my clothes no matter how much I washed them, and I'd learned by then to tune out the chaos and just focus on wiping tables and keeping up with trash runs. That's when an older woman approached me. She had neatly brushed gray hair and a cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, even though it wasn't particularly cold inside. She leaned in toward me in this almost conspiratorial way, her voice low and concerned. "Excuse me, do those children belong to anyone?" I followed her gaze through the big glass window of the PlayPlace.
Two small kids, couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, were climbing up the bright red plastic stairs, giggling as they scrambled through the tunnels. One would slide down and the other would follow, again and again, like they had all the time in the world. At first, I thought maybe their parent was sitting in the corner, half hidden behind the divider wall, scrolling their phone. I looked, but there was no one. No drinks left on the table, no jacket draped across the chair, just those two kids, alone. I told the woman I'd check. I went back to the counter and mentioned it to my manager. He barely reacted, just sighed, muttered something under his breath, and said, "Yep, it happens." And he walked away like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing to me. Those kids stayed in there for hours, 3, then 4. Every time I went to wipe a table near the glass, I'd glance in, expecting to see their mom or dad finally come back. But no one did. By the time the sun was starting to set and the dining room lights reflected faintly in the PlayPlace windows, their mom finally walked in. Shopping bags dangling from her wrists, heavy plastic ones from the thrift store across the street. She didn't look frantic. She didn't rush. She just breezed through the door, called the kids down, and ushered them out as if it was the most normal thing in the world. No apology, no explanation, nothing. That was the moment I remembered my manager's words on day 1. We're not babysitters. The second time, though, that one I can't shake. It was a night week, one of those slow shifts where the hum of the lights felt louder than the chatter in the dining room. Around 7, a woman came in with her kids, 2 of them. I remember because they had this infectious, high-pitched laughter that carried across the restaurant, bouncing off the tile and making even the other customers smile a little. They disappeared into the PlayPlace, and for a while I didn't think much about it. By 9 o'clock, we were closing up. The fryers were off, the soda machine drained, and I was mopping the floor near the counter. The PlayPlace was quiet now, the lights dimmed to save power, shadows stretching across the padded benches and plastic slides. That's when the same woman walked back in. No food bags in her hand, no drink cup, just her purse slung over her shoulder and the strange, expectant look on her face. She scanned the dining room like she was looking for someone, then straight to the counter where my manager was counting down a register drawer. Her voice was steady, almost casual at first. "Where are my kids?" My manager didn't even glance up. How am I supposed to know? The woman's expression shifted, a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Well, I left them right there, in the kids' area." This time he looked at her, his tone sharp and cold. "You're responsible for your children, not us." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Instead, she turned quickly and hurried to the PlayPlace. I stopped mopping, my hands tight around the handle, and just listened. The PlayPlace door swung shut behind her, and through the glass I could see her figure moving in the dim light, weaving between the empty benches and plastic slides. Her voice carried faintly through the glass, calling their names. The sound was thin, brittle, almost swallowed by the hollowness of the tunnels. She pushed open the plastic flaps, bent down to peer inside, called again. No laughter, no little footsteps, just silence and the faint creak of the tunnels shifting under her weight. After a few minutes, she came back out. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her lips pressed tightly together. But before she could say anything, my manager cut her off. "Ma'am, we're closed. You need to leave." That was it. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't look concerned. He just shut it down. She stood there for a moment, frozen, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she shook her head, clutching her purse strap tight, and walked out. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept thinking about the way her voice sounded as it echoed through the tunnels, the way my manager's face didn't so much as twitch. The kids had been there at 7. I remember the sound of them laughing. By 9, they were gone. Just gone. I wanted to ask what happened, but every time I tried to bring it up after that, my manager shut me down with the same flat, practiced tone he'd used on my first day. Not our responsibility. He never said more. None of the other employees did either. To this day, I don't know what happened to those kids. Maybe their mom found them later. Maybe there was some mix-up, some explanation I'll never know. All I know is that when I think back to those nights, it's not the greasy fry smell or the endless sound of the soda machine that comes to mind. It's that mother's voice, thin and desperate, echoing into a space where no one answered.
I wasn't even planning on stopping that night. That's the part that still gets me. If I had just kept driving, none of this would have ever happened. It was one of those evenings where the world feels oddly quiet, almost too still. The highway was practically empty, just the occasional blur of headlights passing the other way. I remember watching the gas gauge dip lower than I liked, my stomach grumbling, and telling myself, fine, I'll just pull off, grab something quick, and get back on the road. I wasn't craving McDonald's. In fact, I almost drove past it. But the golden arches caught the corner of my eye, glowing against the dark like some kind of beacon. Against my better judgment, I turned in. The parking lot was half empty, the kind of dim where the light poles flicker like they can't decide whether to stay on or burn out completely. My tires crunched over loose gravel as I pulled into a space. The smell of grease and fryer oil hit the moment I opened my car door, that familiar, greasy comfort that normally makes you feel safe, nostalgic even. But for some reason, as I walked toward the entrance, a strange unease crept over me, like I'd just stepped into the wrong movie at the wrong time. When I pushed open the glass door, the chime rang out cheerfully, but the air inside was heavy. I can't explain it any other way. It wasn't just the smell of fries and floor cleaner. It was thicker, like tension lived here. And then I saw him. He was sitting at a table closest to the counter. A man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. His posture was stiff, both hands flat on the table, as if he was pinning something invisible down. He wasn't eating. He didn't even have a cup in front of him. He was just sitting there, eyes darting occasionally around the room, scanning. Not casually, more like someone waiting for something, or someone. I brushed it off, or tried to. Maybe he was waiting for his order. Maybe he was killing time. But when I walked up to the counter, I felt his gaze shift, trailing me. The girl behind the register greeted me, but her voice was tight, almost too polite. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her name tag was crooked on her shirt. At first glance, nothing unusual, but then I noticed the way her eyes flicked past me, toward the man at the table, and then back to me. She wasn't just looking, she was telling. I couldn't decode it. Was I imagining it? The way her brows tensed ever so slightly, the way she held eye contact like she was silently pleading with me to understand something she couldn't say out loud. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice calm, but her hand trembled just enough for me to notice. I placed my order, something simple, a burger and fries, and as I spoke, she didn't break eye contact, not once. It was unnerving, like she was trying to anchor herself to me in that moment. When she handed me the receipt, her fingers brushed mine, and she held on a second too long, her eyes flicking again toward the man at the table. That's when I decided I wasn't leaving.
Originally, I had no intention of staying. I wanted to grab my food, get back in the car, and drive off. But something in me said, no. Sit down, watch. Figure this out. I picked a booth near the back, close enough to see the counter, but not so close that I'd draw attention. The man didn't move, didn't blink much, just kept his hands planted firmly on the table, shoulders rigid. He didn't even pretend to look at his phone. It was like his only purpose was to sit there and be. The girl brought my tray over herself, which was strange. I could have easily picked it up at the counter, but she walked it all the way over, set it down in front of me, and again, that eye contact. Her lips parted slightly like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just nodded once, quickly, and walked back. I plugged in my earphones, slipped one into my ear, the other hanging loose. I wasn't listening to anything. I wanted it to look like I was distracted, just another customer scrolling through music, eating too fast. Meanwhile, my eyes stayed on the room, peripheral locked on that man. He shifted once, adjusting in his seat, but his hands never left the table. Occasionally, his eyes would land on the girl, watching her as she refilled the napkin dispensers, as she wiped down the counter, as she bent to grab something from under the register. It wasn't casual interest. It was possession, like he already owned the outcome of whatever was going to happen here. I ate faster than usual. My nerves made me chew too quickly, swallowing before I should have. The fries tasted off, too salty, too cold, but I barely noticed. My throat was dry, and I kept sipping soda just to keep it down. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. By the time I crumpled the wrapper, I started to feel stupid. Maybe I was inventing this whole narrative in my head. Maybe the girl was just shy, or maybe I was misreading her glances. The man hadn't moved an inch. I grabbed a napkin to wipe my hands, ketchup staining my skin, but when I unfolded the tissue she'd given me, my stomach dropped. There were faint, shaky smears across the surface, written in what at first I thought was more ketchup, but as I tilted it toward the dim overhead lights, I saw the numbers. 911. Scrawled quick, frantic. My heart started pounding so hard I thought the man would hear it from across the room. Every instinct told me to bolt, to run outside and make the call. But if I left, what would happen to her in those minutes before help arrived? And calling from inside? If he saw, or if he even suspected, we'd both be done. So I pulled out my phone and did the only thing I could think of. I texted a friend, someone I knew I could trust. Text, call the police now. Here's the address. Don't call me. Just do it. Minutes stretched like hours. My leg bounced under the table, the straw in my drink rattling against the cup as my hand shook. The man didn't move. The girl didn't look at me again. The air was suffocating. Then the door chimed. 2 men walked in, ordinary looking. One in a windbreaker, the other in a ball cap. They ordered casually like customers, but the way they stood, the way their eyes scanned, I knew. Police. Undercover. They approached him calmly, one hand subtly hovering near his hip. "Sir, can we talk with you for a moment?" That's when everything snapped. The man pushed back his chair, and for the first time I saw what had been hidden under the table. A gun. Loaded. His hand twitched toward it, but the officers were faster. They had him pinned, restrained, disarmed before I could even process it. The whole restaurant froze. The girl stood behind the counter, pale, hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. As they dragged him out, he locked eyes with me. Somehow, in that chaos, he knew. His face twisted, and he started yelling, voice hoarse with rage. You're the one! I'll find you! You think this is over!" I couldn't move.
I sat there, heart hammering against my ribs, pretending not to hear him, pretending I wasn't shaking out of my skin. They hauled him outside, sirens lit the parking lot, and for a moment the world was nothing but flashing blue and red. I thought it ended there. I wanted it to end there, but it didn't. Weeks later, I noticed shadows where there shouldn't be shadows. My phone would ring, and no one would answer. Once outside my apartment, I found a cigarette butt still warm near my car. Though I don't smoke, neither did my neighbors. The final straw came one night when I found a note wedged under my windshield wiper. No words, just 3 numbers, scrawled sloppy in black ink. That's when I packed up, left the state, started over somewhere no one knew me.